This is Season 3, Episode 20 of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Today's guest is Dorothy Zemach. Dorothy taught ESL and other foreign languages for over 20 years in Asia, Africa and the US. She now concentrates on writing, editing and publishing ELT materials and textbooks and conducting teacher training workshops. Dorothy launched Ways Goose Press, a small independent publishing imprint for fiction, non-fiction and educational materials, and teaches an online course on self-publishing for ELT professionals through ITDI.
Hey everyone, buckle up for a new episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast, the one and only podcast made to help you launch your business or take your existing business to a level of success you could never have imagined. Whether you're a school owner, freelancer, publisher, or other entrepreneur, you're sure to pick up lots of actionable advice when you listen to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Remember to visit eflmagazine.com for great articles and features. Without further ado, here's your host, the founder of EFL Magazine, Philip Pound.
So welcome back, everybody, to the latest episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Dorothy Zemach. And Dorothy is, what would we say, teacher, trainer, author, editor, entrepreneur, speaker, and all-round maven maverick. Was that the best way to describe you, Dorothy?
Person who will work for food, yeah.
Yeah, like us all when we can. And you're, where are you today? Where do you live?
Home base is Eugene, Oregon, and that is where I am now. That's where I've been most of this year. Prior to COVID, I did a lot of international travel for teacher training. Then came 2 years where I traveled mostly from my bedroom to my office and sometimes back, sometimes to the sofa. And now we're just beginning to open up a bit again. Been to a couple conferences, but I'm probably for the foreseeable future, I'll be in Oregon more than I used to be.
On the Oregon trip.
I like it.
So tell me about Oregon. I mean, the things I know about Oregon is what Nike, isn't it? I think it is
still Nike. Phil Knight is up in Portland, but so I'm in Eugene, Oregon, which is where the major university of the state is. But we have the Phil Knight Arena, we have the Knight Library. So there's still a heavy Phil Knight influence because that's the school he went to. So there's donated money. It's a school for track and field. We get the Olympic trials here every 4 years. We get international as well as national track and field championships. I think we have one coming up in a week or two, which means we'll be hearing the roar of the crowds from our house because we're pretty close to the university. It's a running town. There are lots of bike trails and running trails and athletic stores. But it's the Pacific Northwest. That means we have a lot of rain for 6-7 months a year. And in the last 4 or 5 years, we've started in the fall getting fire season, where we get forest fires, smoke from California and Idaho. We have our own fires. It'd be nice if that didn't last. But
And
let's move on to a more cheerful topic.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot more depressing topics I could bring up. But are you from Oregon originally?
No. I'm not really kind of from anywhere originally, other than the U.S. My father moved around a lot when I was a kid. An academic who went in and out of academia, probably familiar to a lot of people. High school I did in New Mexico, so that was a formative place. I did go to college in Portland, Oregon, so maybe that's one reason that I chose to return here after I was done moving around the world teaching English in various places.
And it could be maybe Portland, Oregon, the climate is a little bit more, what we say, conducive to fair-skinned people. You look quite fair, Dorothy, so maybe...
Actually, I do not sunburn, but my light-haired Australian husband does more. So if we keep him out of the sun, that's probably better for his skin.
I think Woody Allen said it best. I don't burn, I stroke. when he was talking about, the sunshine. So yeah, I think for Woody Allen, that would be
for a long time there used to be a popular bumper sticker for cars that said, "In Oregon, people don't tan, they rust."
Okay.
But because we have a lot of rain and we have acid soil, we get beautiful roses, rhododendrons, azaleas, blueberries, cranberries, big tall Douglas fir trees, redwoods.
And is it true the West and the East are very different in Oregon? I remember speaking to somebody.
Well, the West is coastal. We have, kind of a little bit of a mountain range, and the East can get more deserty. But
that's it. Yeah. So I'll have to see it one day. It's one of the places I want to go, and Washington State as well, and all the greenery and the trees. But tell me, you, as a lot of Americans, you're not really from a place, you travel a lot, settle in many states, especially if people are in the forces, in the military, they go from base to base, or academics, isn't it? They go from college to college, university. So tell me about how you went to university in Portland. How you got into ESL? Was it you had itchy feet, wanderlust?
No. It was complete coincidence. I think you could do this back in the 80s when I was going to university. I majored in something that was interesting to me. So that didn't necessarily lead to a job. So when I was graduating with my degree in French literature, thinking, oh, now what? I think I applied for a job at the library. I don't know that I was brilliant on my typing test, but I was, and in those days, job ads were in the newspapers, right? We had paper newspapers with job ads. And so I'd go through every day looking, and there was a 2-line advertisement that said, "Teach English in Japan, call," and there was a number. So I called, and I went and I interviewed, and I was hired. And between the time that I interviewed and the time that I arrived in Japan, the person who had interviewed me actually sold his school. So the person who met me at the airport had inherited me, but not hired me. And he met me at the airport. And the first thing he said to me was, "I just hope you're normal." I think he'd had maybe some issues with other teachers. And I don't know if I turned out to be normal or not, but I came for a year. I stayed for another year. I'm still in touch with him, and we're good friends. So I think it worked out okay. He was a great boss in that he knew what to do with a completely new teacher. He had me observe some classes. I think I observed classes for a day and then was thrown in. But he was there at the side. There was one other teacher who'd been there longer than I had, but he enrolled us both in JALT and drove us to the monthly meetings. So I had good teacher training once a month. That was real, at least in those days, JALT was super classroom focused in the chapter presentations. So I could go on Sunday and I'd have something to do on Monday. And it was like, oh, this will make teaching easier. And my boss was also very artistic, and he created all kinds of visual aids and flashcards and whatnot. So we had a good set of materials, and we had ongoing teacher training, and he did observations and gave feedback. And so it was a good way to get started.
So you were well matched because, in this industry, it has to be said, there's apart from the great teachers that listen to this podcast and business and school owners, there's a lot of dodgy schools and dodgy teachers, and sometimes
this was not one of those. This was a good school and a good teacher and a good boss, and he eventually sold the school and went on to full-time university teaching, but an excellent way to start.
Exactly. And sometimes the good teacher goes to the bad school, and sometimes the good school gets all the bad teachers, isn't it?
Well, that's probably true the world over. So I did that for 2 years. I went back to the US and then sort of thought for a bit, tried out a couple other things that didn't work. And then I thought, you know what I really liked? I really liked that teaching English thing. And I thought, well, if I really like teaching English, then I ought to go ahead and get a master's degree and do it properly. And once I made that decision, I thought, well, in order to get a master's degree, I need actually more money. Where does money come from? It's like, well, I know where money comes from. Money comes from Japan, from teaching English. So I went back for one more year just to earn money to support an MA. So
And about what, I don't want to put an age on you, Dorothy, but around what
I don't
year
care.
was this? Just as was it pre or post bust in Japan?
Well, I'm not sure I know the bust years. So,
It was
when I
maybe
was doing my
91,
Taiwan
was it?
teaching,
Yeah.
late 80s. I think
Ah, okay.
1989 was the last year. I can sort of position things by thinking of, when was the Gulf War? When did I get married? So I guess I finished my third year of Eikaiwa teaching, conversation school teaching in 88 or 89. I went and I did a 1-year MA program at SIT. And they have, because it is a 1-year program and very intensive, they do winter internships. And I did my internship in Morocco and loved it. So, of course, at the end of my internship, I spoke to the director and I said, I just happen to have here with me a copy of my resume and the resume of my boyfriend, if you wouldn't mind taking a look at him. And he said, sure, you both have jobs. And so went and did that post MA.
So, going then, you stayed in Morocco for a year.
Stayed in Morocco for a year, and he did hire my boyfriend, who is now my husband. We married that year, and it's an interesting year. That was the Gulf War year, so there were some challenges and tensions. But I think what Morocco did for me in terms of teaching was I until then I had all my experience in Japan, right, which is a wealthy country full of very bright people, most of whom believe that learning English is very difficult. And I spent 3 years hearing how difficult it was to learn English, and I think I wound up believing that too. Oh my gosh, the spelling is insane, the grammar is nuts, what's going on with the verbs? And then I go to Morocco, which is not such a wealthy country, but there's a belief that learning languages is easy. And of course, they have the advantage of being at least bilingual. Most people speak at least Arabic and French, possibly Spanish, possibly Berber. But I would meet people who spoke no English, and I would say, well, how long do you think it'll take you to get fluent? And they'd like, well, I don't know, a year. And sure enough, a year later, they'd be out of my This Is a Pen class, and we'd be reading The Grapes of Wrath, which was our highest level. So when I went back to Japan, I went back with a belief that learning English was not impossible. If it's not impossible for Moroccans, I don't see why it should be impossible for Japanese. And I think I had higher expectations, and I think my students did better because of that.
Interesting. Yeah, the pessimism of Japan sometimes can get you down. You need a different perspective, don't you?
I don't know if I would even call it pessimism. It's just sort of a lack. I mean, it gets a little insulated, and there's no way to check in. Well, is the rest of the world learning at this speed? I mean, I look at just as a publishing example, because I know we're going to wind up talking about publishing. When I look at levels of graded readers, the levels in the Japanese platforms are way lower than the levels in the rest of the world. But I don't know that I'm convinced that the rest of the world is better at reading than Japan. I think maybe we collectively, teachers and students, could say, hey, Japan, you're not that bad. You can do it. You can expect more and make faster progress.
Yeah, I think that's why I mentioned the pre and post bust, because pre-bust everything was so optimistic. Everybody was everything was going to get better, and I think there's been a lot of surveys over the years, especially among younger people now, and they say that, but maybe this is worldwide as well, with news events coming out here and there, is that they think that the society will be worse for them than their parents.
Oh wow! Okay. Yeah.
So pre-boom, that was the case. I spoke to. That wasn't the case, but I spoke to Dave Sperling from Dave's ESL Cafe about a year and a half ago, and actually it was probably sooner than that. But Dave started out in Japan as well. Started with a school pre-boom, and then moved to Thailand after that. But his story was very much the same. That things were on the up and up. And for a mutual friend of ours, Chuck Sandy, who worked in in Japan in the 80s how lucrative English teaching was. You know, it's
Yeah.
like, I think he won't mind me saying, but he said, you know, he went to shops and he didn't even look at the prices. So that was the heyday.
I don't think I had that job,
but
but it was possible for me as an Eikaiwa teacher to support myself and even save a little, and that was great.
Exactly, and we've also had guests on who've worked in Japan and, you know, post-boom more recent, and they've been able to save as well. So it is possible, everybody, to save money in Japan, but maybe a little less likely than other countries.
So when I left what I would consider the more remunerative salaries of Japan and came to the US, and it was a time when our son was getting closer to school age, and we had to think, do we want to put him in schools in Japan? Are we going to be here? Are we going to be lifers? Or, you know, and thought probably not. I'd like him to start school in an English speaking country. And we came back to the US, and salaries are lower, you know, and I went from a company in Japan to a university in the US, and I wound up at the University of Oregon for a few years. And, you know, led a pretty modest lifestyle, and we didn't, you know, go see movies in theaters or drink wine or any of that. But every month I felt like I was dipping into my savings just a little. So I started doing more writing and editing to supplement my teacher's salary. And then when I was offered a full-time job with Cambridge University Press at almost double my teaching salary, which makes it sound like it was a huge salary, but no, it was actually just that my teaching salary was so low. The Cambridge salary was normal. I moved into publishing. So I did that for a few years, and from there went freelance, partly so that I could both write and edit. Because when I was editing for Cambridge, then of course I was doing editing 100% of the time, but there wasn't the freedom to travel and do teacher training. I couldn't write my own books at the same time. And so freelance is sort of the best of all worlds.
Okay, and you brought up something that was topical with, we'll mention ITDI a little bit later, but Phil Brown from ITDI ran a webinar, which I fortunately couldn't attend. I had a birthday, my wife's birthday, I'd forgotten about. But side gigs in ELT, I mean, it's a fact.
Yeah, I mean, I was hesitant with that title at first because I thought, well, is publishing a side gig? And I thought, well, actually, everything I do is a side gig. I mean, there isn't a main gig. Everything I do is a side gig. But I do give talks sometimes on, particularly, you know, during, and are we post-pandemic? Or less in the middle of the pandemic than we were.
Still wearing masks here in Japan.
I don't know. Yeah. So we're either in the pandemic or we're slightly post-pandemic, on talks on future-proofing your career. Because if everything was going fine and then suddenly a global pandemic hit and you lost your teaching job, you shouldn't feel that there's nothing you can do. And I think with the whole sort of Zoom revolution, not only taught students that they can learn online, but it let teachers know that they're not geographically bound anymore. But my advice to teachers, writers, editors, school owner, anybody is like to have more than one iron in the fire, so that if one income stream dries up, you've been nurturing other things all along, or there are other directions that you can go in. And I think that not only helps you be more resilient in tough times, but it also takes away some of the fear of like, oh my God, if this book doesn't sell, how do I pay my mortgage? That's not a good feeling. So, you know, I'm still happy to tutor online. I don't know that I have the flexibility to do whole class. I do some online teaching. I have this class for ITDI on self-publishing. I tutor students online. I do in-person teacher training. I do webinars. I still write books for the big publishers, and I edit for the big publishers. And I also write and self-publish my own books, and I publish other people's. So I want to have more than one possibility.
Yeah, as the homespun advice goes, don't keep all your eggs in one basket, isn't it?
Exactly. Well,
many irons in the fire, many quivers to your whatever, many arrows to your
yeah,
quiver, many whatever.
yeah,
I,
exactly.
we could keep going on that one. But how did you first come to the attention of that sounds kind of negative, doesn't it? But of Cambridge as a writer? How were you
Let's see,
chosen? Were you doing a lot of?
when I started writing, actually, while I was still in Japan. I had this unusual situation. Well, it seems unusual having wound up doing a lot of teaching in universities. But when I was working for this company, for Sumitomo, I had to be in the office from 8:30 to 5:30. But I had 16 hours of teaching a week, which is not 8:30 to 5:30. And because my students were company employees who were working a typical Japanese company employee existence. I mean, I used to poll my students. Most of them had 2 to 3 hours at home a day awake. They did not have any free time. So they didn't have homework, right? You think of a university teacher's time, a lot of that is spent grading compositions and certainly preparing classes, but a lot of it is dealing with student work. So I had a groups of good students, but who were not generating homework. And I still had to prepare for classes, but because classes were short term and I would tend to run the same classes again and again, at a certain point, my prep got reasonably efficient. So what do you do with the rest of your time? It being a Japanese company, I couldn't go home. I had to be there being busy. So, the internet was just starting. I joined some groups, I was on the TESOL L lists. I was, educating myself, but I was still, I had hours to play with. And there was a call one day from Robert Habich, who I don't know if you remember him, who was at that time working for Oxford University Press. He was the OUP sales rep. And he said, "Can I come and visit you?" And you know what? I was happy to have someone come and visit me who would speak English and talk about books. So I said, "You can come visit me if you'll take away any OUP books that we're not using." And he said, "I would be happy to do that." I said, "Excellent. I mean, clear out the resource cabinet." So he came and and Robert was great. He knew the industry, he knew students, he knew teachers, and he was actually very interesting to talk to. And so I met with him a few more times talking about books that we were using. And I was using this very nice OUP business series called Business Venture. And because I used it a lot, we were several different classes, I would sort of take notes to myself. There's a place in the audio script where it says company ABC, but on the printed page, it says company XYZ. And one day I just asked Robert, so would anybody pay me to tell you what these mistakes are? And he kind of laughed and he said, "Actually, yes. Send me the mistakes and I'll get you some money." And I think I don't know what I got, it was $25 or it's like not very much. But then I got an email from the commissioning editor on the course saying, "Well, actually, we're about to do a second edition. Would you give us content feedback for more money?" I think it was like $250 or something. I said, "Oh, yeah, I know exactly which exercises work and which exercises are problematic and why." So I did that. And then I heard from her that she was coming through Japan on a research trip for this series. And we met and had dinner and we talked through the book and whatnot. And from that, she said, "You know what? The authors are doing the revisions and they're adding a workbook, but they don't have time to do the teacher's guide. Would you like to submit sort of a tryout chapter, or materials for a teacher's book?" And I don't know how many people they had try out, but mine was the one that was accepted. So I did those teacher's guides. And the editor that I had on those was fantastic. And one thing she said as I was working, for her as a writer, she said, "You would actually be a good editor." And she said, "Do you want to learn the process?" And I said, "Yes, I would love to." So she began telling me everything she was doing. Here's the page proof stage, and this is what we do at this stage, and this is how long it takes, and this is when we commission the artwork. And she let me give feedback on the student book materials. And then she recommended me to various friends, one of whom was at Cambridge looking for writers/editors. And I did some writing for Cambridge, and then I did some editing for Cambridge, freelance. And from that, when they had a position come open, I was invited to apply for it. So it's connections.
Yes, exactly.
You work on the small pieces, and from the small pieces, you work on larger pieces, and you indicate that you're interested, and if you indicate that to the right people, they will pass on your interest.
And one book you've written many books, Dorothy, but one book I can really recommend is I've forgotten the name, but you will remember. You will remember.
Recommendation that will be
it's
then.
a business correspondence book. It's blue.
Oh, Writing for the Real World.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that book, and I would recommend it to anybody to buy. It covers memos and
Emails and business
and
letters.
business letters. Yeah, and it's so nicely paced for a classroom, because a lot of email books out there, they seem like self-study books, don't they? And how is a teacher supposed to teach a self-study book?
Right. And the author on that book, the lead author on that book, Roger Barnard, is actually the author of Business Venture, which was that first business series that I did the student book, the teacher's guide for. So for me, it was also hugely rewarding several years later to come back and work with this author that I had admired so much. He does really, really good materials for beginners, and that's such a hard skill.
Yeah, to be recommended. And of course, Dorothy, we've known each other for a long time. I think, we met actually in Japan, I think JOLT conference about 6 years ago. One of the few people I've met in person. But also last year we ran the TOEFL conference the end of August, and Dorothy kindly was a speaker at the event. And now you're working with Express Publishing, isn't that right? Our friends at Express.
That's who took our TOEFL book, which was actually originally first published with a different publisher. And we felt that publisher, who does still have some other books of mine, was just not doing a good job of marketing that. And we asked for our rights back. And I don't know why they gave them to us. I mean, the book wasn't out of print, but it wasn't selling well for them either. So I'm sure at a certain point they look at it and they think, no big loss. And so I think just because we kept badgering them, can I have my rights back? Can I have my rights back? Can I have my rights back? I think finally it's like, you know what, go away, people, take your book. It's not selling. We don't care. No big loss. And it's certainly doing better with Express, but for a TOEFL book for US college admissions, when we first had a presidential administration, if you want to call it that was explicitly against immigration and international students, that hurt enrollments in the US. And then we had this pandemic, and that hurt enrollments because borders were closed. And in response to the pandemic and borders closing and whatnot, a lot of US universities have made tests optional, including the TOEIC and the TOEFL and the SAT and whatnot. So that particular book, although it's a wonderful book and I love it to pieces, it might have just missed its time in the sun by being 5 years too late, But Express is wonderful to work with, and I'm happy that the book sits with them now.
And a shout out to Jenny as well, a previous guest on the podcast.
Oh, really?
Okay.
So
she was a great guest.
She's a powerhouse. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so you teach a lot then for exams. So we mentioned TOEFL, TOEIC, IELTS as well. Is that right?
No, I'm just finishing up editing somebody's book on IELTS prep, but that's more a British test, and I have not dug into that yet. And I know IELTS keeps trying to make inroads in the US market, and I'm sure they either are or were, but then we have this situation with institutions saying, you can have test scores if you want them, but we don't require them. And then came Duolingo that said, you know what, you can have our test for $49. And suddenly, so
the market has changed, but maybe things go back. I've heard of a few colleges.
If I did another testing book, honestly, I would love to, it's only $49. I'd like to take the Duolingo test and then, write a guide for that.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens after this podcast. So, you did your freelance work. You did your freelance work, Oxford, Cambridge, and then you thought about self-publishing and starting a publishing company. Did it happen like that? You said, "I have some extra hours. I have this skill set."
No. I mean, I was originally I'd started writing short stories, fiction for myself as sort of a hobby, and they were with a publisher and they were doing fine, although eventually kind of had their day in the sun, and I wound up taking the rights back. But I was talking with other authors, and someone said, it's so easy to self-publish, and you have all the skills, learn to do it yourself. So I taught myself how to do the self-publishing. And I thought, I'll just do fiction, and, maybe I'd publish other people or something. I'm not going to do ESL because, I already have connections in the industry. I'm happy with my publishers. I'm not going to do ESL. I'm just going to do fiction. And that's all under a pen name and not connected in any way. But I did have sort of the knowledge of how to make something into a book. Then I was having lunch with a friend who still teaches, well, has since retired, but at the time still taught at the University of Oregon, where I taught. She was my office mate, my best friend there. And at the time, there were sort of two teaching tracks at the University of Oregon. There was like a more career-focused track where you did a lot of teaching, but also committee work and volunteer work, and you were expected to publish and to present, and you had a slightly higher salary than the other track where you just taught. So they had more contact hours, but they didn't have to publish or teach or be on a committee or do university service, any of that. And the teachers were all happy in the tracks where they were. And my friend was in the teaching track because that's what she did. And then the university, I don't know, they were probably looking at something legal, and they said, you know what, we're getting rid of that track. So now everybody needs to be in that more career-focused track. So if you've been here longer than, 2 or 3 years on this other track, you need to reapply for your job with the same criteria that the other people in the career track have. So my friend's looking at me in despair. And she said, actually, I did present at a conference, so I guess I'm okay there. She said, but I haven't published. And she said, what are the chances that in the next 4 or 5 months, I'm going to identify a research area, carry out the research, find something of significance, write it up, submit it for publication, have it accepted, and then have that publication come out in the next 5 months? It's not possible. And I said, no, probably isn't. And I said, but you know what? If you had material, I can turn something into a book. I can make a book. I said, you must have stuff sitting on your computer or something. And she looked a little blank, and then she said, but I don't do anything. All I do is teach. And I said, yeah, but teaching is a thing, right? And I said, you could do a book on how to teach or how to learn. And so I said, who else is in your position? And so she showed me some other names, and there was one other woman I knew in a similar position of her, job description having changed out from under her. And I said, you know what? Let us go rent an apartment on the coast. We'll grab some laptops from the university, a bottle of wine, some salty snacks, and we will just push out some books. So one of them did what became our 50 Ways to Practice series, and the other started on what became my 50 Ways to Teach series. And there's just 51, we put in a bonus, 50 ways to teach listening or teach. I think we started with listening and speaking, and with the practice also 50 ways to practice listening and speaking. So self-study guides for students, and the same kind of advice you would get in a teacher's book from a course book, except not tied to a course book. And we put them out, I think, in a weekend, and in 3 days, 2.5 days, we had 3 books. And so I put them up for sale. And I didn't care if they made any money, because the point was for these people to be published and keep their jobs, which they did. But then the books began selling. And then other people came to me and said, oh, can I do your reading book? Oh, would you like something on how to practice grammar? And I thought, well, okay. And before I knew it, I was in ESL materials, and they were doing better for me than the fiction, I think, because that's where I have my experience and my expertise and my connections. And of course I do love that. So that is how the publishing company came to be. And that 50 Ways to Teach series, we just came out, I think, with book 13 or 14, 50 Ways to Be a Greener Teacher. When teachers began asking for those in paperback as well as ebook, we expanded them. So they're now both ebook and paperback. And those student self-study ones are still just ebook because they're simple and short. And I sell them for $1 or a pound or a euro, depending on where you are. But I was thinking, when I was about the audience for these, as I expanded the list, and I thought, when I travel around the world, I meet so many people who are interested in learning English who cannot take a class because they're already working full time and they have 2 kids, and they're never going to find 20 hours a week to take a class, or even 2 hours a week to take a class. And they don't want an expensive book, but maybe they would pay $3 or €3 or £3 for something that would help them, a small chunk at a time, get a little bit better, right? The same way people love to study with Duolingo, because you can do it for 10 minutes a day or 5 minutes a day, or skip 2 days and then come back to it. And that's not an audience that was being served by large publishers, which need a bigger audience to make their materials cost effective. I mean, they're looking at university classrooms. So, and now I've expanded and I have some books that are used in classrooms too, but a lot of my materials are for independent students and independent learners for whom, nothing was being written really, or not as much.
Okay, so you started the company Ways Goose Press, is that right? Yes,
that is right.
And the question. I think when I attended your presentation at JALT, you said, "Don't ask me what Ways Goose means," or.
Well, because that's just a trick to get people to go to the website where it is explained. But for your listeners, I am happy to tell them that a Ways Goose, and I liked that. That was my favorite word since high school, which I found entirely by accident playing Scrabble, because in my family you were allowed to go through the dictionary looking for, hoping that something might be a word with the letters you had. Ways Goose won't work in Scrabble unless somebody has thoughtfully left goose for you already. But it's spelled WAYZ or Z, GOOSE. And I can't think of any other word in English that has the Y and the Z next to each other like that. And it just looks fantastic. And then when you read the definition is fantastic, which is an annual summer outing taken by members of a printing establishment, usually involving a picnic and a drive into the country. It's like, what? How can one word mean that? But it does. Origin unknown. I did later have the CEO of Cambridge University Press in the UK who recently taken the job and moved into the office, and he found old Ways Goose menus from the 1800s, which he sent me copies of. But it was a festival in printing. There was a time of year when printers could no longer work by daylight because the seasons were shifting and they would have to start working by candlelight. So to mark the change of the season, it was the custom for the master printer to throw a feast for his employees and take them out into the country and celebrate them with a picnic and hijinks and whatnot. And I remember my son once, when I was trying to explain to him how special this was, and because I had talked Oxford University Press when I was in the UK, I talked them into going on a Ways Goose with me. I said, I got to tell you what this word is. We must take a picnic and a drive into the country. And they obliged. And we went punting on the Charwell and wound up at a pub, and we had a wonderful Ways Goose. And I was trying to impress my son with how lucky I was to have this experience, because I'd been at, what you could call a printing establishment. And he just looked at me sort of blankly and he said, but Mom, everybody has a printer. And I thought, well, okay, fair enough. But that means that everybody's entitled to a Ways Goose at the change of the seasons, I think. So
yes,
when I was choosing a name for a publishing company, it is not easy to spell. I don't know how easy it is to remember, but I still like the way it looks. And that word was special to me. And so that's what I called my company.
So now, having successfully self-published, started a publishing company, now you help others to do the same. So
yeah. I mean, I do obviously publish other authors myself, but when someone comes to me with a book or an idea, my first question is, okay, but why would you want to do this through me? And the wrong answer is because I don't know how to do it myself. The right answer is because I don't want to do it myself. But if you just don't know how to do it yourself, I think it kind of, if I could learn how, anybody could learn how. So I'd like to give other people the tools to be able to make their ideas into books if they have ideas that are appropriate for books. And yes, I do teach a course every summer. We've got one coming up in July, I guess, or next week, which does still have a few open spots. I don't know how many listeners you had. They can't all join, but if somebody feels that they're ready to jump in right now, we do still have a few spots left, actually. And when it used to be 4 live sessions, and this year we're expanding it to 5. Just I felt like I needed a little more time. And we talk about what makes a good book for self-publishing. I mean, what kinds of ideas can be successful, but most of the course is spent actually learning how to format, how to make a cover, how to upload it to different vendors. And what I'm going to be adding this time is, with that extra week, is more discussion on marketing and selling and how to handle that aspect of it.
Okay, and from what I know and from reading the ITDI landing page, it's a very hands-on course, and
yes.
you'd like to know the ideas before the student joins.
Yeah, I do ask people to describe what project they have in mind, and they need to have at least some pages written. They do not need to have a whole book written, but we need, 3, 4, 5 pages written so you can start learning how to format. And of course, you can apply that knowledge to the whole book once it's done. But there are types of books that don't do well. Picture books for children are expensive and hard to make. And because we concentrate mostly on ebooks, children don't tend to read picture book ebooks, and paperbacks become very expensive if you need color printing. So I want to know what people's project is so that I know that it's possible. We had somebody once apply who had done a lot of materials to support somebody else's published novel, but that was a copyrighted work. And I said, if you don't have time to get permission, I don't see how you can do a study guide in which you can't quote anything from the book that so there might be permissions issues, there might be technical issues. I don't want anyone to start the course and after a week and a half, I have to say, oh gosh, that won't really work. So I want to know ideas in advance just to make sure that they're coming to the course with something that they will be successful with. And not everybody takes the course intending to sell something. I mean, some people are making materials for their own classes. We had somebody once from an organizational SIG who wanted to put all their chapters meeting notes into a format that could be easily passed on to new committee members. And I mean, it doesn't have to be something for sale, but if you'd like to learn how to make your own ebook, own paperback.
So you gave a really nice example there about picture books, ebook. It doesn't really work for kids. It's more something you have to print.
You could get a beautiful looking thing, but parents don't cuddle up with their kids and a Kindle. You can argue that they should or they could, but they don't. So if you're expecting to sell and you choose a format where there are not a lot of sales, then you will be disappointed. So
for somebody starting out, they want to publish a book in EFL, ESL, ELT. What's a really bad idea? What won't sell?
Really bad idea besides a children's picture book? A bad idea, something so personal to you and your style that somebody else can't make it work. And that's the same whether you're traditionally published or through a small publisher or by yourself. When you create work for somebody else, including people who never met you and never will meet you, you need something universal enough that somebody else can pick up your material and be successful with it. So if you have a super unique method or style or idea that can't be explained to somebody else, that's not a great. I remember once listening to somebody's webinar on a method that sounded very interesting, although complex. And at the end, somebody typed in the chat, of everything you presented, what should we begin with? What should we do first? And he said, oh, you're not ready to do this. You would need to take training courses. You would just feel everybody who attended the webinar going, oh, okay. Not sure I want to go off and take a whole training course in a special method. So if somebody needed special training in order to be able to use your book, I think that's going to be a hard sell. If you have a course where people are flocking to your course and then the book supports the course and you already have an audience, that might be possible.
Okay. So how about something like a book that could supplement a textbook, or let's say a self-study book or a textbook in itself? What's a good idea? What is
a good
generally
idea?
A good,
okay, like I said,
good
you can
seller?
ask bad ideas.
Bad idea.
Say, but good ideas. Well, I mean, we came out when the pandemic hit. One of my authors came to me and he said, "I really want to do a book on Zoom for beginners because there's nothing out there for true beginners of, how do I register? Is this thing on?" And all the books on Zoom were for business people. There wasn't something for teachers. So he said, "I'm teaching on Zoom now." And he said, "Everything I'm learning is new to me." And I said, "Well, keep great notes, Keith." And then, so we came out, we were the first, probably teacher's book out in the pandemic, Teaching with Zoom, which is now a 2-book series. We have a Teaching with Zoom 2 for people who are more experienced. And that book did really well because so many teachers had Zoom thrust upon them. Certainly all the books I had on teaching online did well during the pandemic. But okay. I think a lot of those books that we used to see during the 80s, if you're old enough to remember the sort of conversation topics for advanced students, the big publishers aren't making those so much anymore. They're doing course books and series, and doing a whole universe of exactly. I can see you holding up taboos and issues. So things like that are going to have a niche audience and not be part of a series. The large publishers have pretty much left that kind of book, but there are still plenty of teachers out there who would love a good book of conversation topics or sentence starters or writing prompts or, things like that. What works best for me, and maybe that's also just because of my style and my connection, is classroom focused materials, things that are just super practical, that people can turn around and use immediately in their classes, not so much the theory. Although that said, my most recent publication is a professional development theory book that I actually published because I was trying to find it and buy it, and it was out of print, and I wanted it really badly, and I just couldn't find it anywhere. And then somebody sent me the book in Word documents that he'd gotten from the author when he took a course. And so I read the Word documents and it was really good. And I thought, gosh, I wish this book still existed. But the author still existed. So I kind of cold called him on Facebook and said, I would really like to make your book be a book again. And he was delighted. And so I made that be a book again. And, I had that out there on my stand at IATEFL. And I thought nobody's going to buy a high-level professional development book. And somebody walked by and went, "Literature with a small L. I haven't seen that in years. I must buy it." Somebody else came by and said, "Oh, is that John McCrae's book? I took a course with him in Uruguay. I must have that book." And I thought, "Oh, okay. So I'm not the only one." So sometimes it's hard to predict what will or won't be successful.
Often publishing materials and books, it's complicated because you have to take in like sensitivities of regions, don't you? And we talk about parsnips and
but see, there's an area where self-published people are less tied to that kind of thing because it's easier because you're not paying for office space in London or New York and a staff and whatnot. You can have a smaller audience and you can say, you know what, this book is going to be for Korean businessmen who do business with executives in China. And we're going to talk about, how to ask for a cigarette and say you don't smoke. And we're going to talk about alcohol. And if they can't use that in Dubai, that's fine. They will just not buy this book. And so you can, some of the things that are taboo for publishers, I think it's easier for self-publishers to make regional books.
Okay, so the publishers, the big publishers, legacy publishers, are more vanilla, and
because they're reaching a wider audience, and so they need material that will be appropriate in more situations. And if they can't sell to a wide area, they can't cover their costs, and the book wouldn't be viable. But as an individual, often your biggest investment is time. So if you're also spending time on something you like doing, sort of if your work is your hobby, then you don't feel the crunch as much, and you can take more chances, and I think put out books that will have a smaller audience, but that will still be profitable. And the amount of money that you earn per copy sold on something self-published is far greater than what you would earn per copy sold on something from one of the big publishers. So you'll definitely sell fewer copies. You're not going to outsell Interchange or Headway, but you also make more money per copy. So that also makes it more profitable for you than you might think. I mean, I make more money off a 99-cent ebook than I do on some of my commercially published textbooks that retail for $40.
Okay. And often, as to extend the metaphor with vanilla, it's like they say, most people like vanilla, but few people like pistachio, but they really like pistachio. So if you're making a book, it could have like a small cult following and be able to sustain.
Right, and a small cult following could easily be enough for you to consider it, quote unquote, worth it.
So for everybody listening, try to make it as edgy and controversial as possible. And
try to make it as useful as possible. I mean, what we do in my course, week 1 is we're thinking of who's your audience, right? Who are you writing for? Who do you expect will use this book, and why will they use it? And what are they using it now? What are they using now instead? Your book doesn't exist. What's your competition? And to think through those questions.
And feedback I get from students sometimes about books.
Yeah.
I say, do you like this book? What do you think of these books? Are these books? And when they answer honestly, they'll say, most books are boring. Mm-hmm. That's what they say, except for maybe these particular students I've questioned. They say, except for things like National Geographic books or, with lots of pictures. But they think a lot of the older materials maybe and not necessarily by big publishers, but maybe by schools that have been commissioned by schools themselves.
Right.
There's a lot of very dry material out there.
I think there are students who want to be entertained. I think really what students want is to learn English. So if something is effective, then that will make them happy. I remember once listening to my son in high school talking to somebody on the phone, and he mentioned something about his Japanese textbook, and he called it good, which astonished me because I thought it was it was black and white. It was pretty dry. And so I asked him later, and I said, so you like your Japanese textbook? And he said, yeah. And I said, why do you like it? And he said, all the new vocabulary is bold, and then it's in a list at the end of the unit. And I said, okay. Do you like the topics? And he said, I don't know if we have topics. I said, you do have topics. I know
going a haircut and go to the sober shop. Is it that kind of book? Yeah.
We were playing soccer or something. And I said, you do have topics. And I said, I asked because my publishers are always telling me I have to find, a fresh twist or an interesting hook or, whatnot for something, to catch students' interest. And he looked at me and then he kind of gives this teenage sigh and he goes, Mom, when I want to have fun, I play the Xbox. When I study Japanese, I just want to learn Japanese. He said, our teacher is really terrible. Before every test, a group of us sit down with a book and we just teach ourselves. I need to know what the words are. I need to be able to find them. I just need to know what there is to know so I can learn it easily. And he liked school and he was a good student, but I appreciate that honesty of saying, I don't want a book that's so interesting that I can't tell what it is I'm supposed to do, and I can't tell what it is that I've learned, and I don't see that I'm making progress. And here comes, and a lot of students are going to wind up taking a test and proving their knowledge and advancing to another level, and they want to know what they know and know what they still need to work on. So I think that's why I say, if your materials work, that's the number one most important thing. When students use your material, do they learn? Is learning easier? Is learning pleasant? is it effective? And if you have classroom materials, I mean, so many teachers make their own classroom materials. If you have classroom materials that work, and you can tell because your students' English is getting better, could you give those materials to somebody else? And would they also have success with them? That's the signal that they should be published. And if you have heavy art and video requirements and you're going to need a dedicated photo shoot, self-publishing might not be for you. And that's when you'd want to approach, a traditional publisher. But if you have a heavily text-based approach or something that you could illustrate with stock photography or something, one way to get it to market quickly is to do it yourself.
So ebooks. So printing the actual paper book, because now we have print to order. Is it an option for independent publishers?
Oh yeah, absolutely. All of my books, except that one series of very short self-study guides for students, all of mine are available ebook and paperback. But they're print-on-demand paperbacks. So if somebody wants 100 copies of 4 different books, then I order 100 copies of 4 different books and I send it to them from, via the Amazon portal, which in fact I just did for a school in North Carolina that uses my adult literacy materials. And they could order them through Amazon, but if they order them directly through me, I can give them a $2 discount and still come out ahead. So it makes the books cheap for them, profitable for me, and profitable for the author. And because I'm corresponding directly with my customers, also I can say, hey, do you still have any online classes? And they're like, yeah, some of ours are still online. Would your teachers appreciate having a PDF of the book they're teaching out of to use for their Zoom slides? Oh, yes, that would be wonderful. It's like, well, I'm happy to send that to you. So, because I'm close enough still to the classroom and to teachers that I can think, what do teachers need?
So in the upcoming course, you said you're going to cover a little bit more about marketing, the marketing end of things. And that's a consideration people have to, that's something people have to think about, because there's
yes,
it's swamped, isn't it? Amazon is there, and there are so many options. How do you differentiate?
The challenge is visibility, and I don't know if this will be good news for your listeners or bad news, but I will say that the hardest thing to sell is one book. If you had 3 books, they would all sell better than one book. So if you establish yourself as an author, people are more likely to take you seriously and to believe that your materials might be good. So when you're thinking of an idea for one book, see if you can be thinking in the back of your mind at the same idea at the same time. But could it be a series? Could there be a book 1 and a book 2? Or if I do this on reading, could I do a companion volume on writing? I mean, just to begin to think of more than just one set of materials.
Excellent advice for me, who's written a book, the EFL magazine book of English oral questions, which I think hasn't sold. I still get the emails, but I get no money. So there you go. Publish another one. Maybe business oral questions would be my next next book.
Or for secondary school students, or for university students, or all kinds of possibilities there. You could do it by level, intermediate, advanced, high, beginner.
And would you recommend maybe sometimes they offer to give the book away for like a super low cost, don't they, 99 cents, or sometimes for free for 1 month, maybe get some reviews, because that's really what sells the book, isn't it?
Free works if you have a series, right? If you make, and for some of the fiction that I publish, we have, book 1 is in the series is permanently free. But if they read a free book and they like it, there has to be something for them to do after that. And it would be lovely if they read, or if they leave a review, but most people don't. I think for fiction, the rate is around 1 review per 1,000 purchases. So reviews is like pulling teeth. But if they read book 1 of your fabulous questions for conversation starters free, and they think, oh, this is great, I want more of this. Oh, here's book 2, $2.99. That's not bad. I'll get that. So if you have a series, you could make part of it permanently free or temporarily free. I have a few, I'm trying to think what we have free in ESL. In the Greta Gorsuch Graded Readers, we have the first book in her series, The Bee Creek Blues, is permanently free. So people can try it out. And if they like it, then they can buy other books in the series. I have a very, very short book called An Introduction to Games. And it just talks about some games that people can make, conversation games and games that they can play, and flashcard games. And it's illustrated, and that's free. It's kind of, I consider it my calling card, or my digital business card, because at the end it says, hey, if you like these kinds of practical classroom materials, come check out my publishing company. But that's also the book that I make everyone in my course download, so we can look at things of, what's possible. Oh, you can have live links. Oh, you can have a bulleted list. You see, you can have a photograph. You see, you can have stock photography. So that's my publishing example book for people, as well as kind of my advertising. People love to pick up something free, but if you're going to have something free, it has to be something good, because that's what most people will see, and that's what you'll be building your reputation on. But if you have one book and you make it free and people download it and they love it, after that, there's nothing for them to do. Once it returns to paid, they're not going to buy it again. They've already read it. And might they recommend it to somebody? They might. They might just tell them about, I don't honestly know how many teachers hang out in staff rooms saying, you know what, last month I read a Kindle book, fantastic, you've got to go out and buy it. It's more likely that teachers are looking for supplemental materials for their own classrooms. But if they get something from you and it's wonderful and they want more of it, then they'd buy a book 2 or a book 3. I think with my 50 Ways series, people sometimes come in and say, oh, I'd like 50 Ways to Teach Listing. And they think, oh, this is actually a really good book. Oh, look, there's one on vocabulary. I'll get that as well. So each one of those books advertises the others.
And as you mentioned earlier with your friend who said, I'm just a teacher, I don't know how to do anything else. And you made the point that, you're a teacher, but and you are a teacher and so many other things as well. Yes. That I think there's maybe a lack of belief or confidence sometimes, people who maybe have some great ideas, great materials, but they're like, oh, I could never publish anything.
I mentioned in my Zoom series that we now have 2 books. There's a book 1, and the author of book 1, Keith Foles, who is a pretty experienced materials writer, he came to me and said, I really want to do this book. I said, great, Keith, we'll do that book. But when I wanted a book 2 of more advanced things, Keith said, yeah, too busy, not really interested, too busy. And so I went out looking for somebody who would have the knowledge that I wanted. And I actually found him on the Online Teaching Japan, in the Online Teaching Japan Facebook group. I just went through a bunch of posts, and there was this guy who was great at explanations. He not only knew everything, he explained it very clearly. And the final selling point was that he talked down to nobody. Nobody's question was dumb or stupid or too easy. He would start from where you were and explain it really clearly. So I just messaged him and I said, I see you write a lot. So I don't know if you are a writer, but clearly you can write. Would you be interested in writing a book for me? And he immediately said, fine, let's Zoom now then. Well, okay, I guess you're a guy who really likes Zoom. But it turned out that he thought his friends were pranking him and that it wasn't a real author. And so he wanted to Zoom to see if there was really a person on the other end. And there was me, and I convinced him I was serious. But the first thing he said was, well, you probably don't want me because I'm actually not famous. And I said, I don't care. Students don't care. Teachers don't care. I care that your materials are good. Nobody really is paying any attention to your name at all. I'm sorry, but they're going to pay attention to your book if the material works. So if you have a great engaging writing style and you're giving them important information, that's fine. I don't care if anyone's heard of you before or not. So many teachers have no idea who wrote their main classroom book. They don't know who the publisher is. What they know is the color of the cover. Like, yeah, this great purple grammar book, right? But they don't know if it's published by Oxford or Cambridge. They don't know it's Raymond Murphy's book necessarily. but they know the book is good. So, I mean, for teachers who think, who have confidence problems, I mean, it's not, do people think you are any good? It's like, are your materials any good? Do your materials work? And if your materials work, that is a reason to publish them.
And a shout out to Keith as well. I don't know if he listens to this podcast, but he's emailed me a few times about mailers I've sent out. And one of his books actually comes to mind when you say that. It's and I don't know the name of it either. It's the one with the court cases and dilemmas and controversial. Well, there's one about headscarf bans. I can't remember.
Okay.
I don't know which book it is. Sorry, Keith, if you're listening, or somebody can dig it up. But I don't know. I had an old copy of that, or a school I was in had an old copy. I don't know if it's still in print, but it's it's one. I'll find it somewhere and put a link in the show notes. So I was hoping you'd be able to help me out on that one, Dorothy. But
no, sorry, I have not taught out of that one. So I don't even know the color of the cover. But
yeah, I can't remember.
I know his vocabulary keys book is yellow, but yeah,
there is a yellow one. Maybe it's yellow. Oh, I can't remember. But anyway, I'll find it. So Dorothy, thank you very much for coming on today and explaining what it takes to go from a teacher to materials writer to self-publishing to starting a publishing company and the technical marketing and the mindset as well to be able to go out there. And if people are interested in taking the course, there will be a link in the show notes as well as the mailer.
Right.
People will.
And I do keep promising ITDI that I'm also going to do a self-access version of that. It was supposed to happen last year, and it didn't because I was busy. But I do still keep intending to do that. So it could happen this year. And I know it is live every summer. So.
And I know that ITDI have Barb sent me a video of some of the success stories. So before we finish today, would you be able to tell me about some success stories you've had?
Well, I think the last one that came to fruition was from Louis Lansford, a book on TED Talks, on teaching with TED Talks. And so Louis is a writer. I mean, he's written for a number of different publishers. He's an Oxford author, but he works with Cengage on their National Geographic material. I think he's on, is it Keystone? Keystone. Pretty sure it's Keystone. So he is an established author with major publishers, but this isn't the kind of thing that they would publish. But it's not unrelated. So he actually wrote to National Geographic and said, would you have any objections to my self-publishing this kind of material? And they said, no, we think it'd be fantastic. Go for it. So his course will publicize his indie materials. His indie materials will publicize his course. I mean, I do know, I think probably more in fiction or traditional nonfiction, people are worried that, well, if I self-publish, no publisher will ever take me seriously. That's not true at all. I mean, I still work for traditional publishers. I self-publish my own material, but there's such different kinds of books. And I've not had any traditional publisher give me side eye at all for the self-published stuff. I mean, anything that raises my visibility and platform helps them too. So absolutely no resentment. It just makes you more knowledgeable and more experienced. And I think the more you write, the better writer you become. So.
Okay, and on that,
no reason to think that would tank a budding writing career for you, even if you wanted to work with other publishers instead of just yourself.
And on that note, Dorothy, thanks again.
All right, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast with Philip Pound. For more great advice and resources, check out eflmagazine.com. If you found this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.